and hello everyone. It's my honor to welcome Professor Arvind Panagariya to the plenary session of the Nudge Forum. Professor Panagariya is Professor of Indian Political Economy at Columbia University. He was the first Vice Chairman of Niti Aayog and was India's G20 Sherpa from 2015 to 17. He has worked with the ADB, the World Bank, the IMF, and the UNCTAD in various capacities and has authored more than 15 books, including with Jagdish Bhagwati, India, the Emerging Giant, Why Growth Matters. His latest book, India Unlimited, Reclaiming the Lost Glory, is to be released shortly. He writes a monthly column in the Times of India, and his guest columns have appeared in the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, and India Today. In March 2012, the Government of India honored Professor Panagariya with the Padma Bhushan. Welcome, Professor Panagariya. This session will follow the format of a conversation between us, with the opportunity for the audience to also ask questions, as Rima has just explained. As you know, the forum has participation from government, industry, and civil society. And in the course of our conversation, I will do my best to reflect all three perspectives and also to incorporate audience questions as they come in. So thank you for joining us and look forward to our conversation. At India's independence, Jawaharlal Nehru, speaking about India's tryst with destiny, said the ambition of the greatest man of our generation has been to wipe every tear from every eye. You've written extensively about the history and success of different approaches to poverty reduction in India. Could you share your perspective to start our conversation?
Great. Thanks for having me, Kamakshi. Pleasure to be here. You provide a good starting point. As you know, as you just mentioned, the India's Tryst with Destiny speech by Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. He started off, outlining 73 years ago what precisely are we okay? Yeah. The speech, just to quote a little bit from it to get us started, he said, that the service of India means the service of the millions who suffer. It means the ending of poverty and ignorance and disease and inequality of opportunity. The ambition of the greatest man of our generation, that was a reference to Mahatma Gandhi, has been to wipe every tear from every eye. That may be beyond us, but as long as there are tears and suffering, so long our work will not be over. So, from the very beginning, it was very clear, Prime Minister Nehru was very clear, and that has carried on subsequently with the following leadership, those who succeeded Prime Minister Nehru, that India's biggest challenge was to deal with its abject poverty, widespread poverty. So the objective was correct. Initially, in fact, if one goes back into the history of discussions that took place in the Congress party, even before independence, there was a planning committee in the Congress party back in 1938. They talked about this and they said, look, we are extremely poor. The country's overall income is so low that the only way to deal with poverty is faster growth. And they felt at that time that, look, we need an increase in income of about sixfold, but that is difficult to achieve in a short period of time. And so they set a target of, something like 300% rise in the incomes. They thought that will be a good start. So it was the objective was right, the removal of poverty, the instrument that they identified was right, which was growth. Unfortunately, the approach that we adopted. Now, Nehru was unfortunately also very influenced by the Soviet model of development. And so we really ended up adopting this very command and control model, which in the end failed to deliver. It really the growth that was seen as the instrument simply did not happen. So if you take, even the first entire 30-year period from 1950 to 1980, in the first 3 decades, our per capita incomes grew at a measly kind of 1.6% a year. There's a very slow increase. I mean, if you look at per capita income, if it was 100 rupees, let's say, per week in 1950, it came to only 1980 when it came to only 155 or something. We came to 1980. So that's an addition of 50 rupees to an originally very low income, so of 100, say, per capita, per person per week. It's just too slow. So you see hardly any reduction in poverty. Finally, I think in 1991 there was the big kind of break. Finally, the thinking changed. We gradually decided to move away from the command and control model, allowed the markets to come in, ended the licensing, ended the huge restrictions that existed on investment, huge restrictions that existed on imports, trade, everything, So a lot of the liberalization happened during the 1990s and early 2000s. And that, of course, made a huge difference. Just again, to give you an idea how much difference it made, if you take the first 50 years from 1950 to 2000, you added from 100, let's say, if I normalize the income, per capita income to 100 in 1950, you added just another 200 by the time you came to 2000. Between 2000 and 2014, you had already added more than 300 rupees to that per capita income. So big difference. And this is all, after liberalization. And you see during this period, of course, poverty crashing down. And so poverty, at least the abject poverty, as we call it, extreme poverty, that fell quite dramatically during this period. And you see it happening across the board. Sometimes we become suspicious that, maybe the poverty among certain groups has come down, but the disadvantaged groups like the scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, they did not benefit from the decline in poverty. Not true, actually. Across the board, you can look at individually the poverty levels among scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, Muslims, Hindus, Jains, Sikhs. Any way you divide groups in the individual states, every single state, you take 93, 94 to 2011, 12, and you see poverty significantly coming down. So finally, we have done well. It's still extreme poverty. We are not a prosperous nation. Other countries which started much sooner than we did on the right paths to development, like South Korea, Taiwan, later China even started in about late 1970s. They are far ahead of us, but we are on the road to prosperity. And then if we really do the right things, I think we can get there in another 2 to 3 decades. We should be about $10 trillion economy or more. And that should really get most of the population prosperous.
Thank you. On the point about getting to a $10 trillion economy over the next few decades, could you specify what specific policies India needs to adopt to accelerate growth so that everyone can become prosperous, and also so that India, in the process of achieving this prosperity, also reaches the UN Sustainable Development Goals?
Good, Kamakshi, good. That's a good natural question to address. Now, very quickly, of course, the reason growth is so important is that it works in 2 ways. First, it empowers people. So whenever this kind of rapid growth happens, your real wages rise. And so it puts income in the hands of the people. So their ability also to access the social services gets better. If you're dirt poor, then you can't take a bus to the school next door or to the hospital next door and so forth. So even to access social services, you need some minimum income. So that's one way, so the individuals get empowered and they can choose to send their children to better schools and so forth. But also growth gives the government much greater power, more revenues come in the hands of the government, and that allows the government to then spend on social causes, on social objectives, education and health being the primary ones. But remember, things like Narega, the Food Security Act and so forth, they simply could not have been implemented on the scale that they are being implemented without the growth that happened after the reforms took root in India. So that is the background why growth is really so important. And now to get to what we need to do, a lot of things we have already done. I think we have done quite a bit, but I think we do need to do a bit more. First and foremost, I think, in our case also, growth is tied to this overall question of transformation and good jobs. So today, for example, jobs by themselves is not a major problem for India. I mean, even if you take this pessimistic figure that floated everywhere 1 to 2 years ago, 6% unemployment rate. As unemployment rates go, that's not such a high rate. And people are doing something. And you can see why, because, poverty is still, the income levels are so low that to make their ends meet, everybody has to do something. Our real problem is the low productivity, that the output per worker that we generate is extremely low. And so the employment also, therefore, produces relatively low levels of output, low levels of value added. And those who are employed by others as workers, the wages that they receive are also low. And that really is the crux of the problem, that, how do we get out of this low productivity equilibrium? And there, at least my own diagnosis, and I talk at length about this in my latest book, The India Unlimited, which in the US will be coming under the title New India from Oxford University Press. What I argue there is that, look, a key problem India, one of a really central problem of India is the widespread production activity taking place in really tiny units, very, very small units. Now, what does that mean? Take farming, for example. 70 million of Indian farms, and so that's really 70 million out of almost 250 to 300 million families, are working on farms that are less than half hectare, with average size of just 0.23, not even a quarter hectare. You can't produce very much on such a small farm. It is a low productivity activity. And so the workers therefore are employed, but they're underemployed. They're grossly underemployed. Come to industry and services, they are also, again, overwhelmingly people are employed in these micro and small enterprises. Now we, often kind of play up, we celebrate micro and small enterprises, but the productivity in these enterprises is extremely low. And this is particularly so when it turns out that you have very few medium and large firms. Now, we have a few medium and large firms. These are largely concentrated in industries that are highly capital intensive, right? So you got automobile, you got machinery, you got even pharmaceuticals, information technology. These are industries where the large firms and medium-sized firms exist, but these are not big employers. These are capital intensive or skilled labor intensive industries. Big employers are apparel, footwear, furniture kind of industries, a lot of light manufacturers, a lot of low-level services and activities, which you can think of. We all see workers, people in our everyday lives working. And these are all very tiny, small little enterprises. There's a concept in India we call own account enterprises. Own account enterprises are the enterprises which do not employ a single hired worker. They're all self-employed. Now, these own account enterprises account for a very vast part of our employment. So they're self-employed. or there are these unincorporated enterprises which do employ a few workers, but they're very small. So all in all, when you put together the picture, what turns out is that only about 9 to 10% of our workforce works in firms that have even 20 workers or more. So even if you think of larger enterprises, 20 or more, it's just 10% of the workforce, total workforce. That is where the problem is. So that's where what we need to address. We need a much more open economy. In that particular respect, we have gone back. We had opened up the economy, and this liberalization process went very well till 2007. Then we stopped. And in the last 3 years, we have gone into reverse. We have started again. This whole idea of import substitution has been revived. I think that's dangerous. That certainly is something we need to return away from. Then a lot of reforms have been done. This government really, corporate profit tax, knocking it down is a very, very important reform. We have had the bankruptcy code, the insolvency and bankruptcy code, extremely important reform got done. DBT, very important reform got done. But still, three very, very big areas of reform almost untouched. You got labor markets, very inflexible. Once you hire a worker on a permanent basis, extremely difficult to, and if you're a larger company, then almost impossible to lay off the workers. That is a problem. And so you see very small enterprise, in apparel, for example, that's a prime example which could provide lots and lots of very good jobs. It has done it for China. It is doing it for Vietnam, doing it for Bangladesh, not for us. It's an $800 billion market, export market in apparel. We got 20 billion, less than 20 billion. We ought to be exporting about $200 to $300 billion worth of apparel. But because our companies tend to be small, because the very tough labor laws, firms are not willing to get larger. But also land has become a big constraint. This Land Acquisition Act that the UPA government brought in 2013, very pernicious. It makes it very difficult. Large enterprises require large pieces of land. In India, first of all, the land titles are not there. And so many pieces of land are always in dispute. So, anybody who is trying to create a 50-acre, 100-acre piece of land, it's very difficult. There's always small little pieces in between, which nobody knows from whom to buy. So that makes it problematic, and the government acquisition becomes very impossible because the Land Acquisition Act that we put in place in 2013 is very problematic. So you need those. Then our financial sector currently is in deep stress. That will require some work, because of COVID. Now that sector is going to face yet more problem once we begin to come out of COVID, because there will be possibly other bankruptcies, because a lot of firms out there which have had a cash flow problem, and for wrong reasons they may have to become insolvent. And that would, of course, mean more non-performing assets. And there are clearly predictions that, as we get out of the crisis and we come to take stock of what happens in the public sector banks, particularly, these non-performing assets may rise up to, again, 15-16% of their total outstanding loans. So that's a very large number. So that's something government will need to address at the time. But those are the sort of things we need to do. Urbanization, another very important one. We are urbanizing very slowly. We are urbanizing at something like 2 percentage points per decade. Countries do it per year, and we had 2 percentage points per decade, and we are still 30-31% from 2011 census, which is still very low rate of urbanization. We need in the cities low rent rental housing, affordable rental housing, very, very important. That all ties back into urbanization issue, that land prices are so high in India that commercial rental activity is almost impossible. It's unprofitable. So we need to do things, a large number of things to do on land, how to bring the land prices down, but that's another thing we need to do. So that's a set of things, I talk about it in the book, India Unlimited. And there are a set of governance reforms, but they had to go in parallel.
Thank you. So we have quite a few questions from the audience, and I'm going to take a couple of questions to follow on one of the themes that you have just said. So in this process of improving the productivity so that it doesn't happen in these distributed small and micro enterprises, but happens in a way to allow more value add, there are two questions related to that. One is from the audience, when we're a $10 trillion economy, what do you see as the share of agriculture, manufacturing, and services? And the second, which relates to the point you made about the need for larger scale industrial activity. And the second point related to this, I will take this first and I will take the second question later.
Okay, very quickly. So on agriculture, this is a very, very good question. This is where the part of the crux of the problem is, where we still have about 42% of our workforce. This is the latest PLFS, the Periodic Labor Force Survey for 18-19. And the figure is about 42% of our total workforce is in agriculture. Now, its share in the GDP is only 15%. And when you get to 10 trillion, it's going to fall to 7-8%. Unless these workers come out, they have a very, very low share in the GDP on which they are being paid. So what has not kept pace in India is that, almost every country, as it grows rapidly, because industry and services can grow 8%, manufacturing can easily grow 15% in the countries like China, South Korea, Taiwan has grown 15% for sustained periods of time. Likewise, services, then, services quickly follow the industry because, once manufacturing kicks on, gives you income, people spend it. A lot of non-trade services are all non-traded. Most of them are non-traded. So they have to produce domestically. So they also get kicked up. So they also grow 10, 11%. They can. Agriculture, if you take out a total history from 1950 onwards, 3.5%. So you can maybe push it to 4%. But the share, the arithmetic is against agriculture in terms of the share in GDP. It's going to fall. If you grow rapidly, it is going to fall. Even if you grow slowly, it will still fall, but it will take much longer. That's all, because 10 trillion will take you 40 years rather than 20. So, and so this is where the crux of the problem is. You need the farmers actually to migrate out to industry and services. That really is what needs to happen, and which is why, in the end, good jobs have to be created. You say, why are not enough migrants coming out of agriculture today? In COVID, we saw all these migrants walking back and so forth, and on the television, anything looks very large numbers. But compared to when you say it in the perspective of the total population, it is not such a large sort of number. Migrant workers are still very small proportion. You need many, many more workers to migrate out of agriculture. That's how we are going to raise they need to access, even today, outside of agriculture, the output per worker in industry and services, even with this low productivity, is about 3 to 4 times of what it is in agriculture. Because you've got 42% of the workforce, but you got only 14-15% of the output share.
So, given the strong presence of civil society organizations on this forum, a number of questions have come in from the audience about this point of migration. One of the questions is sort of the opposite of what you have suggested, which is, can any actions be taken to create livelihood opportunities in villages, given so many of the problems that we saw with migration and reverse migration that were visible to people as a result of COVID. And while this is an audience question, it taps into a larger question that may be relevant for us, which is, there's a tension between treating everyone, especially the vulnerable, in an equitable manner, and at the same time, on the other side, maximizing economic growth. So, what would you suggest for balancing these two objectives, and what is the role that each of the stakeholders in watching this forum government, industry, and NGOs and civil society. What is the role that each of these stakeholders can take in balancing these objectives of equitable treatment of the vulnerable while at the same time maximizing growth?
Very, very good, Kamakshi. So first of all, um, um, uh, you know, uh, uh, certainly agriculture will not solve this problem, because I mentioned 70 million farms, less than a quarter hectare. You can double their income, you can triple their income. It is so low that doubling or tripling doesn't bring you prosperity. So this whole idea that we think, that somehow we can do things which will raise farm incomes. We should do all the reforms in agriculture, and I'm very pleased the government has done some of the fantastic marketing reforms. I've been advocating those for a long time, and very, very pleased that the government did that and all. But still, having said this, the basic point remains that the income of in agriculture on these 70 million farms, which are less than a quarter hectare on average, and every one of these farms is less than half hectare, you cannot get the farmers, now become the livelihood issue. So how do you create the livelihood? That is what we have been doing for 70 years. That is what we have, answer people who say that create livelihood in rural areas for these people. Answer, why have we not done it in past 70 years? We have been now independent for 73 years. And since 1950, we have been on this development path. I don't see a tension. Actually, tension is coming precisely from stopping the process of transformation from proceeding ahead, from moving forward. I think if we actually take the necessary measures now, because of all the policies we have pursued, what are your flourishing sectors? All your flourishing sectors are either highly capital intensive or they are skilled labor intensive. You got IT, we still want more and more IT, which is fine. I'm sort of, that's all sectors that are doing well should do well. That's a good thing. But your machinery sector, your financial sector, your pharmaceutical sector, any sector you mention which actually has done well, petroleum refining, another very successful sector, but all of these sectors are either highly capital intensive or they are skilled labor intensive. They are not creating jobs for the people down there in farming and in rural areas and so forth. You need industrialization to become broader based. You need the labor intensive industries. Apparel, footwear, furniture, vast number of these light manufacturers that China continues to still, actually in spite of its wages that are 4 times our wages, continues to do all the daily use items, whether it's kitchenware or things like umbrella, and everyday things that we use. Why are we not exporting these in very large volumes? That is ultimately, if you do that, you grow far more rapidly. Government gets revenues. You got then the government has the revenues to spend on creating livelihood and what have you in the rural areas. But if you don't have this, you don't have the revenues. How many people are paying taxes? A very tiny fraction is paying taxes, because only a tiny fraction have that kind of income. So, after 50, why did it take 50 years to start Narega? I'm not a fan of Narega. I would do cash transfers if it was up to me, because Narega takes away the people's labor and doesn't do enough with it. So productivity of the Narega labor is very low, in my view. Some good use was done by Prime Minister Modi, there's absolutely no doubt. They started doing the wells and for Swachh Bharat and so forth. So I think productivity of this did improve dramatically. But I would just give the money to the people and leave the labor with them. Then they can use their labor to earn some more extra income in other employments. So that is what I would do. But anyway, because some growth happened finally, this is why we were able to do Narega. This is why we were able to do the Food Security Act. This is why we were able to finance the PM Kisan. Now, 75,000 crore rupees gets transferred under PM Kisan every year. But this is still small. This is still too low. You need more. You need more. And more is going to come from precisely the kinds of policies that I'm talking about. Once you get more, you can do things for the livelihood also. But without it, you're not, if you think this, if you want to balance this tension and therefore not do the necessary reforms, then we'll continue to grow at 6, 7, 5, 6, 7%. We'll get there, but will take 40 years.
So thank you so much. So on this topic of, we need to do more right now in order to get the revenues, in order to be able to do more for the people. There's a saying that you shouldn't let any crisis go to waste. And with the COVID crisis right now, there is a lot of talk of companies diversifying their supply chains out of China and into other countries. What opportunity does this provide to India, and what should India do to grab opportunities on a long-term basis that are presented by COVID?
It's a very good question again, Kamakshi. And absolutely, I think we are very well placed currently. Who has the kind of labor pool that China does, right? I mean, if you're leaving China in a natural way, which is the country that ought to succeed, it should be India. But a lot of multinationals were already leaving China. I mean, the US-China kind of trade war plus then COVID adding on to it accelerated that process. But the process was already underway of the companies wanting to move out of China because the wages had risen quite dramatically in China. And so in many of the labor-intensive activities, China has become now unprofitable. So these activities will continue to move out of China. But we need to do things domestically. I mean, it's really, one of the things that I have argued is to, create about half dozen, what I call these autonomous employment zones. This is very much, reproduce Shenzhen. Shenzhen in China, the history is that, around 1980, this was a group of fishing villages with about 300,000 people as the population. And then China kind of opened it up to investors from Hong Kong, from Taiwan, even from South Korea, anywhere from wherever they would come in. Very flexible labor markets, very flexible land markets. And Shenzhen, of course, has local authority. Local administration can write its own land laws, they can write their own labor laws. So a lot of autonomy they got. And that, in effect, brought huge amounts of investment. Today, the per capita income in Shenzhen is something like $25,000 plus, and the population is about 12 to 13 million. It is an astonishing kind of transformation. And Shenzhen is an example, but there are other cities on the coast of China which have undergone similar transformation. This is the model we ought to copy. Create half dozen or so of these autonomous zones. 2 or 3 of those ought to be near the coast, so that they really can also bring goods components and process them quickly, and then quickly export them back out. A lot of value added domestically in our market. Employ our workers, and this is where the multinationals could easily then could come in also, because if you give them autonomy, institute good labor, because nationally, I think this is a real challenge for the government to reform the land laws, labor laws, and so forth, but within certain zones. But the zones can't be like these special economic zones we created previously. These are tiny little things, which became land grabs. That's not what I'm talking. I'm talking about take areas of 300 to 500 square kilometers. Some of it is maybe already built up. There might be some activity already going on. That is fine. Just declare it as the autonomous employment zone, and then give it lots and lots of authority locally to respond to the needs of the businesses, and let these multinationals come in there, locate there. The big advantage with the multinationals is they bring their own capital, they bring their own management, they bring their own technology. They, above all, most important, they bring the market links. They are operating in the global economy. They know where the world markets are. They know who are the buyers of their products abroad. They use our workers. And that is where you get to create lots of good jobs for the people. So the whole transformation that I talked about, that's one way to kickstart. So, but there's a huge opportunity for us to grab.
Thank you. You mentioned one of the, some of the what you need to grab this opportunity. But on the other side, from the employee's perspective, one of the questions that has come in from the audience is, what is your perspective on the future of work? What are the skills the workforce needs to be equipped with, not just to benefit themselves, but also to effectively contribute to economic growth as you see it? To this audience question, I would add a supplement with a question of my own, which is for people who don't expect to receive higher education, but to expect to receive only secondary level education. What do you see as necessary in our education system to allow this increase in productivity, allow the people to grab this opportunity as you see these large companies getting built through the policies you've outlined?
Yeah. So both, it's the same question, more or less. So look, a couple of very good things in the national education, the new education policy, provided we, properly implement these, and that is always in sort of issue in India. But vocational, now the new education policy says that they're going to incorporate vocational training, vocational education as a part of the regular curriculum. I've been arguing for this for a long time. Taiwan actually followed that model. That's very, very important. We should do it as fast as we can. I mean, even people who are not necessarily going to be doing the services jobs of the kind that vocational training will train you into, would love to get some, I mean, how to do a little plumbing, how to do a little bit of car repair. Even, I would have loved to know that in my college days or school days. So that's one very, very important thing. We need to really do that. And for the rest of it, what skills and so forth, my personal view always has been that, look, you should let the industry do the skilling. When we say that on a massive scale, we are going to skill you and so forth, some skills you can do, driving, for example, it's a skill commonly required. So, there's a large demand for it and so forth. But beyond that, you cannot skill them in the way that enterprise will want you. And moreover, you don't know which skill will be in demand. I mean, if we really could figure that out, Planning Commission would have succeeded. But we had the Planning Commission trying to figure these things out for 50 years. Which sectors will do well, which sectors will not do well, and they even tried to decide which sector should do well, not only will but should do well. But in the end, it was an utter failure. So it is have good policies. It is the entrepreneurs who will decide what activities they want to undertake. The only reason I'm mentioning certain types of industries, labor-intensive industries, is because that is based on the experience of every country that has succeeded, that initially labor-intensive industries have to do well. And if in India, in spite of this massive workforce, labor-intensive industry is not doing well, there is something wrong with the policies. So those policies need to be fixed. But often, I tell you, apparel, I've talked to our largest exporter. This is Mr. Harish Ahuja, who runs the largest export firm, Shahi Exports, from India. And he says, look, give me a person with proper fifth grade education. We can skill the person within about 6 weeks. And within 6 weeks, the person comes to full productivity. So for most part, allow the enterprises, because then they know exactly what kind of skills, how they should skill and which skills. Some the government can do, but by and large, I think give them basic vocational education through both school as well as college. So even the kids who are doing only up to 10th grade and so forth, while they do this, and this can be done side by side in a regular school, so that you don't also stigmatize. I think India has a lot of this stigma in India about vocational, ITI. No, nobody wants to go to ITI, but put them into regular, even, in the still we are living in 21st century, and almost 2 decades have passed, and still you see these advertisement coming in, that people want BA, Bachelor of Arts, but they don't want somebody having graduated from ITI or something, in the marriage market. I'm saying, there's still the prevalent view. Unfortunately, that stigma continues. So do it in a regular education, give them vocational and so forth. So there will be no stigma to attach to it either. And they will get the basic skills so that they are ready to then learn what specifically they will need to do in the specific industry in which they eventually get employed. So that's how I would approach it.
Thank you. So we now have a problem because we have only 5 minutes left. And it's clear that if we had another 50 minutes left, we still wouldn't get through all of the points that Professor Panagariya would like to make. So what I would suggest is there are 2 or 3 questions from the audience that I can pose to you, and perhaps you could choose which one you would like to answer, Professor Panagariya, since there might be time left for only one question. One question is, how do we ensure food security if we move away from agriculture? And the other option that you might want to address is has to do with quality of life. And, given that you cannot measure it purely in terms of poverty, what are the other measures? And perhaps to make it more precise, I could add, given that we are in COVID times, what changes could you suggest to improve healthcare delivery to the vulnerable in India? So if you would like to address both in 2 or 3 minutes or just one, I leave the choice up to you.
Okay, I think both can be addressed. Food security is a straightforward matter. 40% of the workforce does not have to produce food that the country needs. America only 3 or 4%, probably maybe even 2%. But it's certainly below 5% of the workforce that produces food for entire America, and they can export an awful lot as well. So they're also producing quite a bit for the rest of the world. Food production can easily be maintained, actually. In fact, marginal decline in workforce has happened in agriculture, but very largely because a lot of the women have withdrawn out of the workforce. But output has continued to grow. So I'm not worried a bit, actually. That can easily be done. Larger farms will actually also become more capital intensive, and they will produce. So that's not a big problem. On the quality of life, of course, environment is a big issue. And our cities need to be cleaned up. I mean, if you look at the list of most polluted cities, out of the top 10, India has about 8 of them. I mean, even a city like Gaya, where you would not expect, Gaya is in the top 10 among the most polluted cities. So pollution then also feeds into health and all sorts of things. So absolutely, you got to address the issue. But, I personally like to think more, not so much, I don't come from the climate change angle here. I think we can contribute to climate change, but we ought to focus on cleaning up the environment in our cities, because that's where the kids are getting sick, and it begins from the childhood and all. So that's a very, very important part that we need to address. It's been a very tough one. I mean, I was in Delhi for 3 years at the Niti Aayog and all. It's a big challenge, but we got to address it. I think there's no shortcut to it. Health, of course, then there are other issues, and COVID you mentioned. Public health, I think, very, very important. We have cut out public health. We spend much more resources on medicine. But look, individuals can spend, and they do in India anyway. Most of the medical expenditures is done by the individuals, by the families. Public expenditure on health is very limited, 1.2, 1.3% of GDP. On education, we are doing it. I mean, in fact, this proposal in the new education policy to raise it from 4 to 6%, I would rather use that extra 2 percentage point and spend on public health. I think, that is where you really need badly. States have neglected, so very simple thing. I mean, there was a time when public health and medical used to be two separate entities, and public health had its own cadre, own budget, but we merged them. I think, early 50s or late 40s, by mid 60s, we had merged the two, and medical side gobbled up completely the public health side. So you have this, rain comes in, standing water everywhere in the city, mosquitoes come in, and you have the spread of dengue and all. COVID is the new thing, but in India we continuously have these infections during the rainy season and all. All that needs to be addressed, and public health needs to be particularly separately addressed, and probably need to create a separate public health cadre in the states. That's for the states to do.
Thank you. So, and that's the right note to end this on, because that's not just the need of the hour, but we've learned about the need of the decade as well from Dr. Panagariya over the past 45 minutes. So thank you so very much, sir, for joining us and sharing your thoughts. On behalf of Nudge and everyone else, my sincere pleasure to thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Kamakshi. Thank you.